This is the Sony 28-70 f2 G Master lens. It's basically replaced all of my prime lenses over the last couple of years. It's also been by far my most used lens as a professional, but with its hefty size and its hefty price tag, is it legitimately worth it for most people? Let's talk about it. So this video is not sponsored. Sony has no idea I'm making it, but this video is sponsored by Aftershoot and we'll talk about them later. So to start us out, this is obviously a zoom lens. We have a 28mm focal length on the wide end and a 70mm focal length on the long end. A more stereotypical zoom range is going to be 24 to 70, but obviously your aperture being at f2 is the trade-off. You're losing 4mm on the wide end to give yourself that extra full stop of light. Now, as a photographer, if you went and looked at my Lightroom catalog, the vast majority of images are all taken in that kind of 28 to 70 range. Even if I'm going outside of a zoom lens when I'm using prime lenses, my main two primes are a 28 and a 50. I also bring usually like a 35 and a 75 in something like a Leica kit, which obviously makes this single lens incredibly convenient. I will also say that I could shoot an entire wedding on only this lens, but there are times where I do some dance floor stuff or some wider landscapes, astrophotography, things like that, where I like to have something closer to a 20mm lens. And while I do love a good 85mm, a 135mm, something like that, if you are using a higher megapixel camera like this A7R5, like the A7R6, on the A7R5, using the APS-C crop mode moves you from 70 to 105 and moves your aperture from the equivalent look of a f2 to an f3. And again, you're actually not changing your aperture, you're not actually changing your focal length, but in cropping in to your image, that's the essential look you're getting in full frame terms. And for most weddings and events that I'm doing, at least 105mm equivalent is going to be plenty. But of course, there are times where having an 85 or a 135 or even longer like that could be really useful. Now, the biggest reason you're going to use this over a 24 to 70 or even your primes is going to be the versatility of having this really solid middle ground focal length, pairing that with an f2 aperture. I like being able to have the subject separation if I need it. It's just a nice tool in my toolbox. And then an extra stop of light, especially when you're pushing into those higher ISOs, the difference between 3200 and 6400 can be significant. So traditionally, that's where I've always used prime lenses to have that f1.4 aperture when needed. This is obviously more of like a bridge lens in between a traditional professional level zoom lens at f2.8 and a professional level prime lens at f1.4. You're getting a lot of kind of the conveniences of a zoom lens, but also the look of a prime lens in one lens. And that's obviously what makes this thing so special. Now, I will say that there is something that is more creative feeling at times about shooting a set of prime lenses. The forced limitation of only having a single focal length just does make you, it forces you to be more creative with the tools that you have here. You pair that with the slight decision fatigue of where am I gonna be? I have the option of going anywhere from 28mm all the way to 70mm. And I can say that there are times where this is an incredible tool and it's just 100% like the get things done lens for me. Anytime that I just need something, I need to get stuff done, I do not need to be super artistic about things, this lens is incredible. The times that I need to just like make sure that my stuff's in focus, make sure it looks good, and then you still get some character out of the f2 aperture, this thing just does the job incredibly well. Is it going to give you the full look of like a dedicated prime lens? No, but I do think it has a lot more of like the secret sauce and the look than something like a traditional 24 to 70. But I would be lying if I didn't point out the fact that this does have a bit of, again, like decision fatigue, and it pulls you a little bit out of that creative element. And so you just need to know that going into it. If you are used to shooting a bunch of prime lenses and then all of a sudden you have everything at your disposal, it does take a slight shift in your brain of you have to add intentionality back into it because it almost makes it too easy to get the stuff you want. Oftentimes, if I'm not thinking about it and I'm not being super intentional, I will pull the camera up to my face at 28mm and then I will zoom in to what I'm thinking. And I do find myself just kind of flopping back and forth between 24 and 70. Obviously, sometimes I'll be somewhere around 50, but I do find that there's a little bit more indecisiveness than when I have two different cameras, one on each side, and I'm pulling up a specific lens for a specific look. But the thing that's amazing about this is I can have one camera and I know that no matter what, it might take me an extra half a second. It might take me a little bit different bits of brain power, but I will get the job done with this setup. So I do think that that's just something that I've never seen anybody else talk about. And it's just one thing to kind of add into the idea of like, do I want to go down this route? But it is a reason why I always do pair this with another fun camera of sorts. So I usually have like my Leica M11 or one of the Hasselblad cameras like the 907X, or even if I'm shooting all Sony, I'll shoot this alongside another Sony body with something like the 50mm f1.2 G Master lens. But again, at the times where things are moving really, really fast and you just need to rely on the gear and have incredible autofocus, have a really unique look, and have every option available to you, this just absolutely does it. Now, I want to take a quick second to pay some bills and thank today's sponsor, Aftershoot, for sponsoring this video. Now, if you're a photographer like me, you know that editing can actually take up significantly more time than the time you spent on the actual photo work. Now, here's where Aftershoot comes in as a culling, editing, and retouching tool that I've actually used for years now before they even sponsored anything of mine. Now, it is an AI, so before you go running away from anything, it's very different than some of the ways that a lot of the other generative AI things work. It runs fully on your device, so it never gets uploaded. Your client images never touch the internet, which obviously for weddings as incredibly personal events is super important for client privacy. And for example, I did a multi-day wedding in Iceland that I took over 5,000 images on multiple cameras. And what's amazing is that Aftershoot culled, edited, and retouched all those photos in the same amount of time that it would have taken to just cull them myself on my own. It's also not just stealing looks from other artists, it learns from how you actually edit your own photos and applies those specific adjustments to future photos that you put into the system. So things like white balance, exposure, straightening, all the tedious stuff, which then frees me up for more creative work like dodging and burning, masking, and removing distractions out of images. And even if you skip every paid plan, the raw processor is completely free and it's worth downloading just to try that out on its own. And while it's subscription-based, it is a flat fee, so it's unlimited. You can use it as much as you want without having to pay per image. Like I mentioned, before they even sponsored anything, every single image that I've put out there has gone through Aftershoot in some way or another. So if you want to free up more of your time for creative work, check the link in the description. You can also scan the QR code here to download Aftershoot and get a 30-day free trial, which might help you pull out of your backlog, as obviously we are in the middle of wedding season in the Northern Hemisphere. So thanks again to Aftershoot, and back to this crazy lens. Now, the biggest thing that I think that are going to be the potential downsides is going to be the size. I've purposely had a overhead camera here so that you can see it. You can kind of see me interacting with it. I'm like over 6 feet tall, not a small person in general. So I find that this is pretty good, but I will say that I definitely don't, I don't carry this around in my personal life. I don't take this out with my kids. I don't take this on walks to the coffee shop. It's not something that I take out unless I'm doing some sort of work. That being said, the reason why it is one of my most used lenses, and actually is just straight up my most used lens, is because of how incredibly well it performs. And I will say that I've used this in both photo and video, and while it is large, it is definitely less than bringing multiple different primes around. And I'm usually using it on like a dual camera harness. I would say that if I was carrying this around solo, I know some people that just use a setup like this all day long and they're just gripping the camera like this. They don't use a strap. I do think that would be very, very fatiguing. I would have to like do specific hand workouts or something with my fingers to try to negate some of that just grip on a camera all day. And I will say that the times that I've used this for weddings on my Sony FX3, it definitely was a little bit more fatiguing, both because of the lens and then also because I've used like a battery pack behind it to just have like a full rig that day. So it's definitely not small, but my general feeling is that if a lens is under 1,000 grams, which this is at, I believe, 918 grams, it does make it a lot more manageable for like an all-day shoot kind of thing. And if you need to like put it away for dancing or put it away and have a break from it during cocktail hour or something like that, it's definitely something you can do. Moving it to a dual camera harness is also something that's really helpful. But I will add that the size and weight is incredible on this. Like, it is so much smaller than the Canon version. I would 100% say that this lens is a lens that's worth switching systems for, both because of its optical performance. It's super sharp, The f2 aperture is amazing, but it's 918 grams, and I believe the Canon version is 1430 grams. So it is significantly smaller and lighter than the Canon version, which makes this, you know, if you're doing a lot of all-day weddings and you're gonna want one lens, like I know a lot of people that move to the Canon just for that lens from them. I'm hoping, to be honest, I'm hoping that Canon makes a new version. They can make it smaller. But as things sit right now, if you are a Canon user, I would legitimately encourage you to either borrow a friend's or maybe rent one for a weekend just to kind of feel out how it feels. Because the optical quality is legitimately better. The size and weight are significantly better. And while you might prefer the ergonomics of a Canon body, you might like the files a lot better or something like that. I do find that the Sony system, as a former Canon user, is really, really amazing. And again, this lens is worth switching systems for on its own. Now, the final thing that's going to be a hurdle for some for sure is going to be the price. Currently, this lens sits at, I think, about $3,200, $3,300. I think the Canon version is like $3,400. So they're right in that kind of same lane. But if this is going to be replacing multiple prime lenses like it really has for me, if you just add up the cost of 2 regular prime lenses, you're pretty close to this anyway. So I will say that while the price is not nothing at all, and I definitely think that earlier on in my career, putting $3,300 towards a single lens would definitely be an absorbent amount of money. But if you have the means, I do think this lens is one of the things that's like absolutely worth it. If it got taken, if it got stolen, if something happened to it, if I broke it, whatever, I would immediately purchase another one. So I know this video probably came off as a bit of a love fest for this lens, but it really is one of those things that I think there are downsides. I think that I'm not using this all the time. Like I'm not bringing this with me everywhere I go. But the reason that I shoot Sony and the reason I have this particular setup is because it is just like the biggest peace of mind of like, if I am like overwhelmed with other things going on, if there's a lot of other stuff racing through my head, I don't have to think about this setup at all. I know that the images are gonna look really great. I'm gonna get really good files that are really easy to edit for me. And while this zoom lens setup might not force me to be as in tune with the artistic process, it does free me up in a lot of other ways mentally, because it's taking some of that photographic mental load, I guess, and it allows me to be more empathetic. It allows me to pay more attention to the timeline. It helps me to sometimes pay more attention to the composition and the framing. There's just a lot of ways that if you're intentional about the reasons you're using something like this, it can just free you up in other ways that forcing yourself to use something like primes just doesn't. So thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you have one of these or what your thoughts are on these super fast, zoom lenses in the comments down below. You can check out my initial video on this up here. Check out my video where I go to New Zealand and use this as my main wedding photography lens up here, and I'll see you in one of those.